welcome everyone to this exciting panel hosted by GITA, Gender Institute for Teaching and Advocacy. We're going to delve in today to critical discussions on queer and trans studies. Today we have the privilege of hearing from a variety of presenters who are at the forefront in Colorado, some of them newly at the forefront in Colorado, on research focused on queer and trans color analyses. Our discussion today will center on projects that challenge physical as well as psychic boundaries, exploring important themes of identity, resistance, and liberation through various cultural, historical, and theoretical lenses. While our roots are in Colorado on the Front Range, the insights today, or shared today, will hopefully resonate far beyond that, hopefully further fostering a deeper understanding of queer and trans studies, encouraging meaningful dialogue across and through differences. I'd like to first get started by introducing our three speakers. Dr. Korean is a Zainichi Korean community organizer and researcher working with Korean diaspora communities in Japan and the US. His research examines how diverse Korean organizers, predominantly women and queer folks, are cultivating radical kinships to overcome political divisions and collective trauma toward a future of Korean reunification and liberation. Next we have Dr. Zaynab Shahar from MSU Denver and from GITA. Dr. Shahar uses philosophy and queer theory to examine the relationship between gender, ritual obligation, and public religious spaces in Jewish and Islamic law. Finally, in the middle we have Dr. Nishant Upadhyaya from the University of Colorado Boulder. Dr. Upadhyaya teaches and writes on queer and trans of color studies, South Asian diaspora, and anti-imperialism. Please join me in welcoming our panelists for today. It's okay, Dr. Adele, we'll start with you.
Yes, I'll go first, and I'll time myself. And thank you so much for having me here. I'm from everywhere, but I moved to Colorado Springs last year to start my job in the sociology department. I was in the East Coast, New Jersey before. I also did my undergrad in San Francisco, so I have both coasts. Now I'm in the middle, closer to both coasts, and I'm loving Colorado. I'm outdoorsy. I love sleeping outside. So it's a pleasure to be here. I think I'll start by addressing some of the key questions that this panel is trying to address about what does it mean to do queer studies in this region. And as I was going through this interview job process, I had a Zoom interview first for this position. A couple of days later, Club Q shooting happened, and it was a very defining moment for me to take on this job. I'm like, this tragedy does not necessarily deter me from taking this job. So I emailed the search committee being like, I hope you're doing okay. You know, they might have students that might be impacted. And I was like, I'm still committed to this job. Queer youth needs queer adults, and I would love to be there for the community, as I'm aging more and more. And I found this wonderful community in my department, and I see myself as a student advocate. Doing queer studies is not only about research, but it's also about teaching too. And I feel a lot of sense of responsibility in cultivating relationship with students, making sure they're okay, and making sure that they have people to talk to. And it's difficult within institutional settings because there are a lot of things that institutions can do and cannot do. And as an individual, there's a lot of things I can do and cannot do, but also there's these boundaries and these crevices that I feel like I could still try to fill in as much as possible without necessarily burning myself out. So I'm trying to find balance, but I'm a community organizer and I love talking to people. And as a social scientist, I'm a sociologist, I'm endlessly fascinated by human beings and I love talking to people. And I think as I share my stories of how my communities struggle with community divisions, different kinds of gender divisions within our kinship and family dynamics, and sort of connected to the larger landscape of the geopolitics. Right? Whatever happens within our families, not only about our families, not only about our cultures, but it's also about this very material, economic, geopolitical dimension, especially for my community of Koreans in the diaspora. And so I also switched a little bit more into my works, research work, but just wanted to sort of share my excitement and perspective about what does it mean to do queer stuff as a queer adult in this region. There's a lot more we have to do, and there's a lot more we can do. And I'm honored to be in this space sharing these passions together. And so I come from a community of Koreans in Japan, and I'm a third generation Korean in Japan. My dad is second generation. He was born and raised. And you might be familiar with the US context of Asian American or Korean American migration. And in Japan, because the migration and citizenship law are different, that's because they're born in Japan, you don't get citizenship automatically. So my dad, Koreans got colonized by Japan about 100 years ago. And during the colonial time, a lot of us came to Japan as citizens, technically. And when colonization ended, our citizenship got stripped off and we became stateless. And my family members, my dad, my older brother, they don't have citizenship of any country. The reason why, my dad has South Korean nationality, so he has a South Korean passport. He was born and raised in Japan. He doesn't really speak Korean either. He's diasporic. And in the context of cultural assimilation, a lot of Koreans try to hide the fact that they're Korean by not speaking Korean, using Japanese names everyday lives, not even telling their children that they're Korean in many cases. And sometimes, people find out in their teenage years, later in life, that they happen to be Korean. And that also, it's common to cause this identity crisis later in life too. So there's a lot of complex things happening. And so he has South Korean passport, but just because you have a passport, that doesn't mean that you have full citizenship. You don't necessarily get to vote in any country. And my brother is the same status. But 1 year before this whole law changed, and when my older brother was born in 1981, he needed a Japanese father citizen to get citizenship by birth automatically. Our mom is Japanese citizen, but dad is not. So he sort of inherited that stateless status. But this law changed 1 year before I was born, and I only needed a Japanese parent, either mother or father. So I was luckily able to have citizenship by birth automatically. So my last name is Eda, and that's my mother's last name, Japanese side. My Korean side last name is Park. And my younger sister also has the same status, full citizenship as me. So within my siblings, 3 of us, there's this whole geopolitical stuff running through borders, systems of oppression, legacies of colonialism. So that's how I sort of grew up. And also I'm gay, I'm queer, growing up in Japan in a pretty rural countryside, suburby place. It's beautiful as Colorado is. And I wanted to do queer studies, and I was aware that there's not much happening in Japan. Or like, to do queer studies in Japan, you needed to go to the top elite university, and I wasn't interested in doing all that studying. So I came to, of course, San Francisco to study, and I found queer Koreans there, and I was like, yes, we're queer Koreans. I'm Korean too, but I don't really know what that means. I don't speak the language. The only time growing up I would get exposed to anything Korean culture was 1 day out of 365 days on New Year's Day, when we would visit our Korean grandmother, and we have some Korean food, 3 different kinds of delicious kimchi.
So you were aware from childhood?
Yeah. I was luckily aware. Yeah, because my dad used to go by his Japanese alias in high school days. So my mom calls him still with his Japanese name, but he abandoned it and in his 20s or so. So all my life I've known him in his Korean ethnic real name. Real name, fake name is not necessarily a good way to describe it. So I was aware, but I didn't really know what that meant either. So I was like bragging to my classmates about, oh, I'm Korean too. And they would be like, oh, that's so cool. Until you get to a certain age, right? So you started to get a little bit of at least implicit anti-Korean atmosphere. Not too much in my case, but that's often the case in the overall original Japanese social context. So I started finding Koreans, and I did my research on community organizing among queer Koreans in the US, including Korean Americans, also Koreans from Japan who are called Zainichi Koreans, which literally means Koreans residing in Japan. And also Korean American includes 1 out of 10 Korean Americans are transnational adoptees, and they also have their distinct experiences and identities, which is not the same as the dominant way of being Korean American. So we all, and most of us are queer women and non-binary, so bringing into this really diverse experiences and perspectives about what it means to be Korean, and all these questions about what to make of it, and coming together, like often finding each other on the internet, looking up Chinese Korean, and sort of coalescing into some school campuses, major US cities, starting this radical, often anti-imperialist political groups, and having these discussions about what it means to be queer and Korean at the same time. And some of these, I want to share a little quote from the interview about, right, so oftentimes, some of the conversation about being queer and Korean is like family stuff coming out, these a little bit more intimate micro level conversation. But in our organizing spaces, we're also connecting our family and kinship issues to this larger geopolitical context of our homeland being divided by the US, right? So you might not be aware of that historical context, and people often think that South Korea and North Korea are at war because of their whatever conflict, but the division of Korean Peninsula was imposed by the US, which is a fact. And I can tell you a little more if you want to hear more. But so with this awareness of US imperialism, connecting to the dynamics of heteropatriarchy, colonial dimensions, we're sort of thinking about what does it mean? I'll share a couple of quotes from these 2 community organizers I've interviewed. This first person, Jay, she was involved in very early stage Korean gay organizing in New York City, sort of founding some of the earliest, very first gay Korean spaces that are not only about socializing, but also not only about service provision, but actually advocating and creating change themselves. And those different approaches within the gay Korean community also sort of have a little bit of tension. Well, how much of our own involvement should try to lead to the change as opposed to sort of seeing yourself as the object of service. Right? So Jay said, a lot of members are queer in terms of composition, talking about their organization. It's not explicitly part of the work, but the values and practices reflect queerness. When I look around, a lot of the activists with radical politics in the Korean community are queer, right? So what is that about? That can't be an accident. It's probably because of the marginalized positions we're in within the Korean community or mainstream society. We're exposed to non-dominant politics, so we bring that political outlook, and that's my guess. So talking about why is it that a lot of gay Koreans, queer Koreans, coalesce in these radical spaces? I have 2 more minutes. One more quote I want to share. This is from Unsu. These are pseudonyms. Who was my significant mentor when I was finding queer Korean communities. Unsu was founding this radical progressive Korean group organization in the Bay Area in 2010 or so. Being inspired by other kinds of organizations in other cities like Seattle, New York City. So we were talking about what motivated Unsu to start a whole organization. And Unsu said, I had searched for queer Koreans for so long, and then I found them, and I kind of got in touch with some queer Koreans, and I was like, is this it? Are we just queer and Korean and not talking about other things? That's it? like all we have is to talk about our coming out struggles and like family stuff, which is important, so important. I get it because I'm living it, and at the same time, I'm like I have other things that I'm concerned about. We're talking about undocumented students on campus. We're talking about all these other things. Like I got other stuff that I'm connecting to all these stuff, and this is not enough. Right? This sense of not being enough. Like there has to be more. There has to be more to the meaning of being queer and Korean at the same time. So this sense of futurity, sort of kinds of connecting to the way we do organizing. And one concept that I was trying to think about is tenacity, queerness and Koreanness coming together to think about tenacity. Etymologically, tenacity traces back to like holding something, holding each other accountable, but also not letting go of each other no matter what happens. So some of the things I'm working through in my current book project that I want to share about time. So I'll pause here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Nishan. I teach at CU Boulder. I've been here in Colorado for around 5. This is my 6th year, starting my 6th year here. And I think what does it mean to do? I'll also start with that. I'm just gonna come to that question later, but I think I'll start with that as well. What does it mean to do queer studies in a place like this, place like Colorado? I've been teaching queer and trans studies at CU Boulder for the last few years. And if you've been to CU Boulder, it's very unlike this campus. It's a predominantly white campus. Predominantly, we have the highest number of 1%ers in any public institution in the country. We have more male students than female students, which is defying all national trends for the last few decades. And so it is a predominantly cis-het white men on campus. And Colorado is not much different from that. And so coming here and being aware where are queer and trans folks of color, there's not a whole lot of us across the state. And I think so that doing queer studies on a campus like that, where has been a way to build community. It's important to teach and do the research that I do, but also as a way of making community. And so I think and that community, like I'm meeting souls through that community. Sunny, I've known for a long time. From Toronto, we went to grad school, but queerness has always been about community for me. Finding like-minded queer folks of color, trans folks of color, where we can see each other, right? And we can like talk about the struggles of coming out or not, but also see a broader vision of what queerness allows us to see. See not just our lived experiences of marginalization, but connecting with other folks who may or may not have similar experiences of marginalization. Right? So what that has led is to have a community. So like knowing Haruki for a long time, so when I moved here, Zaynab, it's always been just collecting, not in the objective way of just objects collecting, but collecting rad people and finding a base, a community that Colorado can be home, temporary or permanent, whatever that means. But I did grad school in Toronto, and then after that I moved around for a few years, and every place I ended up at, queer folks of color were my first folks that I found community in, and that allows to breathe, and then that allows to then do the work that we want to do, both academic, intellectual work, but also to do work in communities with and finding that. So queer studies as I don't really use queer studies. I say queer of color, trans of color. That's where I situate myself. Queer studies for me begins with people that I don't really care about. So I find queer studies entry points from Black feminist scholarship, Black queer studies, but also transnational sexualities, some coming from the global south, and basically Black, indigenous, queer of color, transnational, global south queer studies. All of these frameworks allow us to understand that queerness, as we understand now, is a product of colonialism, and that to be queer, to claim that category of queer or to thinking, anti-colonial praxis, anti-colonial organizing, anti-colonial relationship building. And communities are really, really, really important in that area. Across what Haruki was saying within the Korean context, I think a lot of organizing that happens in the US, usually it's queer folks of color who are the forefront of those organizing. Across from Black Lives Matter, from ICE detention to indigenous sovereignty to now Palestine solidarity work, often it's queer folks of color who are leading those social justice calls, right? And so but then in a place like Colorado, that kind of gets erased because there are not that many visible. In the last 5 years, I think there's more and more visibility of queer and trans folks of color. But on my campus, there's still not that much visibility, and so I feel like, and just every time I'm here, it's so many folks of color, so many gender non-conforming trans folks of color, just walking, and it feels so different from walking on my campus where every fall I have to get used to. So yeah, I didn't look at that. When did I start talking? 3, 4 minutes? Okay, I'll say 11. Okay, sorry. What I wanted to talk about today was also through these experiences of being in the community, as being included and excluded. So me and a really close friend who used to teach in GITA classwork, who left here 3-4 years ago. Did anyone else meet? Yeah. So we used to be here for a few years, and then I'd also met them through other queer folks of color before moving to Denver, and GITA was one of those trans queer non-binary person that I met, and who I was already in community with when I moved to Colorado. And this was just before the pandemic. This was a time there was a lot of trans conversations happening around inclusion in the military or the exclusion of the military. And so I found ourselves in many trans spaces in Colorado and Denver area specifically, where someone would always be talking about that how a U.S. military is so transphobic and that we need trans folks in the military. And so that spoke to the whiteness of these trans spaces often, and we always were like, where are we right now? Why are we here? Why do we have to talk about the military when we are talking about trans liberation? And why is this the main conversation? So I was in a few different spaces where I was invited to speak as a speaker, and someone before me or after me would start talking about how transphobic this is, that trans folks are not included in the military. So Ikaika and I started, we were invited by Denver Freedom School, which was a collective that no longer exists, but it was a collective a few years ago, which would do these bi-monthly conversations about taking education outside the university system and being in community and sharing knowledges. So we were asked to come and talk about trans abolition and what does that mean. And for us, military was at that time at the forefront of engagement in Denver, because that's all people were talking about. That's not all what people were talking about, but mostly that's what people were talking about, and not talking about how trans Black and brown women are being killed, or different forms of violences that trans folks continue to face, and that military is that form of exclusion is part of that larger violence that people face, but that should not be the only thing that people are asking for, and that military is not going to be a savior for anyone. Military is the only role that military has is to kill people, and when it recruits folks of color, queer folks, trans folks, that does not diversify the military, but rather it diversifies who's going to kill more Black and brown folks outside of the US, right, and within the US as well. And so this came through community, and this came through this project with me and Ikaika. We ended up writing about this, and a paper came out, article came out a few months ago, pushing an argument that we should actually ban trans folks from the military. One thing that I agree with Trump, banning trans folks, then let's ban queer folks, let's ban folks of color, let's ban women from the military, and then eventually abolish it. Right? But what does that mean to say that within spaces violent harm that trans folks face, right? And this also kind of feels a little kind of outdated because since then we know what is happening, what has happened in the last few years with all the number of legislations and bills and laws and policies and trans policies across the country, right? And so the struggle has shifted in the last few years. But in 2016 to 2020, all people were talking about the military, bathrooms, and pronouns. Right? And military took a lot more space than it should have taken in talking about violences that trans folks face. And since then, the conversation got shifted primarily because Biden changed the policies, trans people can be in the military, and now we just see such a rampant escalation in transphobia across the country. Right? But at the same time, so as fighting the current moment of transphobia through what happens with these bills and legislations to make an argument that yes, we should support exclusion of trans folks. It feels a little bit insincere, but taking from abolitionist thinking, that is actually a demand that is very important. Right? We cannot military sold to trans folks, not just trans folks, queer folks, folks of color, folks who come from working class families, poor families, rural backgrounds, that this is the only way of upward mobility, this is the only way to get employment, this is the only way to get healthcare access. And for a lot of trans folks who don't have access to healthcare, transforming, gender affirming access, that military becomes the only avenue that people can actually get the healthcare they need, right? Which are great things, but that should be for everyone. That should not be on the basis of fighting in wars and killing other people, which is the main premise of the military, right? And so, how do we make that argument that let's actually keep excluding them and think about an abolitionist perspective where trans liberation can never be achieved via the military, vis-a-vis the military. Right? So in the paper we contextualize it through an Asian American Pacific Islander critique, saying that the U.S. military in the last 100 years has predominantly been fighting wars across Asia, from the Korean context to Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, to everything that's been happening in the greater Southwest Western Asian context with the war on terror and everything that has led to that. Right? And so the military has been fighting all these wars across Asia and fighting and killing brown folks across these contexts. And the reason trans inclusion became a thing is that less and less people are going to the military, and so by including queer and trans folks, there could be more people in the military, right? And that form of inclusion, because the numbers are declining, and that's not inclusion, right? We don't need trans fighters dropping bombs on other people, but because that becomes the narrative, how do we push back against that? How do we say that this is not what we need? So we looked up how trans folks in these different contexts in Asia are responding to the U.S. military, and so we talked about cases from the Philippines, where a few years ago U.S. Marine killed a trans sex worker while he was stationed in Subic Bay, which is in the Philippines, which used to be one of the biggest U.S. military bases, and used the logics of trans-panic to kill the person. He was imprisoned in the Philippines for a few years, then was pardoned, and then came back to the U.S. and nothing had happened. Right? And so when the U.S. military is actually killing trans folks, then why do we want trans folks to be joining that? Right? And so using examples from the Philippines, from Pakistan, where a few years ago a bunch of trans women, hijras, Pajaswaras, which is a local name that trans feminine people use, mobilized against U.S. drones that U.S. was throwing on Pakistan and then disrupting in the name of fighting Taliban or whoever else, that they were attacking civilians, right? And they would say that the civilians were terrorists, and that's why we killed them. So these trans feminine folks organized against these groups to say this is not what is going to bring liberation. This is actually killing our people and killing us, right? And then along with that, we also use examples of Hawaii, where trans Mahu activists have been trans feminine / Mahu, which is the local word that trans folks used in the Makamori Hawaiian context, who've also been fighting against the U.S. military with all the military bases across Hawaii, as Hawaii being, we can call it the 50th state, but it's a military outpost, right? across the global south and across Asia and Oceania are saying we don't want the US military, then why are trans folks here wanting to be part of the military, right? And so we analyze these testimonies by white trans military personnel that how when I'm on this one film that came out in 2018 called Trans Military, where this white trans guy talks about how he feels authentic when he's in the fields of Kandahar in Afghanistan. And he has this whole testimony about when I'm in the US, people see me as female, but when I'm on the field, people see me as a guy, and I'm there serving my country, and I'm the most authentic masculine self in the field when I'm killing others, killing Muslims, right? And that narrative that gets in the post 2016 moment, since Trump was in power, that we have to care about inclusion, we have to care about all kinds of marginalized identities to feel included. So if this guy is saying that he feels the most included in the military, that's the most testimonious thing that we should care about, right? And so these white, and not just white trans folks. The documentary had one black trans guy and one trans woman of color who were similarly saying these things that I feel excluded in the military, but also the military allows me to be the man or the woman I want to be. And the military doesn't discriminate against who I am, because if I'm doing the work, doing the work here means killing the people, killing Muslims, then I'm included in the military, right? And so we use those testimonies to critique and say that trans people are only needed right now because cis people, not enough cis people are going to the military. And then why should trans people take up that role? Right? Let Biden's son and Trump's son, if they want to be in the military, they should be in the military, but no one else should be part of that military, especially if being marginalized through the similar violences of fighting against carceral violences of prisons and police and detention centers and psychiatric wards. Here, to extend that to the military, to say there's part of the same picture which are meant to control people and incarcerate people through these different logics, and then amplify, keep giving money to military and police to have the most lethal military, as one of the candidates is talking about right now, that they're all part of the same machinery in terms of what they want with the military and how the military is imperial, colonial, capitalist, heteropatriarchal, and pastoral institution, and that can never give us inclusion, right? So GITA and I worked on this paper, and then came out a few months ago, published Frontiers. But just to wrap up and say, that work came through community. That work came through queer studies, engaging, thinking about queer trans studies, building relationships, and being in the community, and working across institutions as collaborators to try to say how we change these connotations. These connotations are not leading us to liberation.
So, admittedly, I've only been in Colorado for 2 months, so I can't really attest to what it means to do jurisprudence in the desert quite yet. Give me a couple years and some more SPF, and I might be able to think about it. But a lot of my work is grounded in the community work that I was doing both in Chicago and internationally. On the one hand, I was helping to build queer Muslim community in Chicago, whether that's social space through Third Coast Queer Muslims, where we would host people not only from the Chicagoland area and the upper Midwest, but literally, it kind of became a own queer Muslim underground. People would call me when they were in town from the East Coast or the West Coast and say, I want to have brunch. And so all of a sudden, I'm planning brunch in my pajamas for 3 hours later, right? And at the same time, I'm also doing interfaith engagement between Jews and Muslims in Europe, parts of Canada, and different parts of the United States. A lot of the queer studies relationships to religions has been oriented around what I consider to be a very boring question of whether religion affirms us or it denies us. And for queer Muslim spaces, that had long been the discourse. Can we engage things like the Quran and jurisprudence in a way that helps us feel affirmed as people? And me being somebody who is classically trained in religious studies and philosophy, I psychologically had a hard time with that, because for me, answering the question of whether religion affirms or denies you kind of sets you up for failure implicitly. Religions, in my estimation, don't exist for that purpose for anybody who participates. Like, the point of religion on a most basic level could be considered like sanctification of what you consider the divine, whether you do that in an individual or a communal sense, right? The other reason I have a problem with this question is because it would constantly be the debate between queer Muslims and the mainstream Muslim majority, for whom a very long time, queer Muslim politics was oriented around trying to get people to accept us. And through the unfortunate circumstances of the Pulse shooting in Florida, a bunch of us in Chicago just kind of looked at each other and said, we could waste our time trying to convince people to let us into their communities, or we could start our own communities. And in the process of building up Masjid al-Rabia and really thinking about what does it mean to have a Muslim, like a queer Muslim space that is actually about being observant, a lot of my own academic work started to shift. Namely because I really started to think about not whether or not me praying in a mixed gender space is considered sinful or not, but really what is the nature of obligation? What constitutes obligation on a legal level? How is that defined? How is that articulated in relation to understandings in gender, but also understanding the public religious space? Meaning, Judaism and Islam are both communal religions, for better or worse. Yes, there are aspects of it that you practice by yourself naturally, but the imperative is to practice with community and to be in community with each other, right? And so I started really taking a deep dive into Jewish law and Islamic law to really peel back the layers of what it means to be obligated. And in the process of doing so, I really had to find a theoretical framework that works for me. Because as I told my students who are in my feminist and queer research method, I took classes in queer theology. And I love my professor, Ted Jennings Down. May he know divine light always. But queer theology just did not do what I needed it to do. It was still this liberal question of, you know, if we queer Jesus, will we feel better? If we change Jesus' pronouns, we feel better. And I'm just kind of sitting here like, bro, that's not what I'm interested in. And to be fair, there are people in like Muslim and Jewish spaces who have floated with, how do we do this kind of theological thinking? But at the end of the day, I'm not really concerned with what you call God, but like what you do with it as a concept, right? To your point, like you can have a gay Jesus, but if you have a gay Jesus that's the glory and service to empire, is that really gay Jesus? You know? And at the same time that I am pursuing both a master's and a PhD at a seminary, I'm also reading queer color critique because it wasn't something that was really being taught in our classes. I like to tell people, for those who aren't familiar with the Academy of Religion, that when it comes to gender and sexuality, AAR is like a day late and a dollar short. Everybody's still stuck on Judith Butler. Everybody's still, no, I'm serious. Like everybody is still referencing undoing gender. There are people still publishing books about how, you know, we're doing gender all the time. And I just would sit there and think to myself, like, no. I would read books that do this and think this is a real waste of analysis, because I'm pretty convinced that performativity is not the only thing that's happening within these rabbinic and these Islamic legal texts, right? Like, not to get too deep into it because it wouldn't make sense without context, but like a lot of the discussions about gender and obligation that happen in both Jewish and Islamic law, yes, have patriarchal consequences and at times use very patriarchal language, but they're really questions about, one, legal method. How do we come to a decision in a way that's rigorous, in a way that's consistent with what's already been established? right? And if we do need to innovate something, how do we innovate something in a way that does not throw out everything that comes before it, right? And the other concern is theoretical. Knowing that the world changes, law naturally has to adapt as well. So then how can we write legal rulings, or how can we have legal discourses that recognize the fact that people change, the world that they live in and practice change, and ultimately nothing about how we engage religious practice is static, right? That took a whole lot of peeling back layers that I don't think I would have gotten to had I just stayed in the party of folks who are stuck on people like Judith Butler, or even more recently, Gail Rubin. Right? And I want to be clear, I enjoy their work to a degree. I'm not a hater of post-structuralism. It just wasn't what I wanted to do with my own work. So I took the invitation of Jafari Allen's conception of rhizomatic thinking, where he argues about what does it mean to shift, rethink, combine intellectual, political, and social traditions so that we can understand them not differently, but otherwise. How can we do something completely different with these things that not just haven't been done before, but people tend to think aren't possible, right? And I bring that to bear on very specific rulings within Jewish and Islamic law to ask really hard questions about what does it mean to be obligated? What also does it mean to be a legal subject? How does this concept of legal subjectivity come into view? Under what theoretical conditions do people attempt to flesh that out? And what are also their overarching concerns in the process? And I think for me, as somebody who is now in a space of my life where I am not doing community work and doing research like at the same time, I think if there's anything I can offer Colorado as a space that's very different from where I wrote my dissertation, right? Like Chicago has a huge Jewish community and a huge Muslim community, right? And that all very much informed the kind of research that I did. Denver is very different in the fact that, as you pointed out, it's very white, and it's also very Christian, lately, right? It's not something that you get necessarily smacked in the face with, but you've been walking out the REI, it's there, right? And so I think the thing I can offer, what it means to do queer color critique on the range, because I recognize that this social geography is kind of wedged in between multiple states that are very evangelical in their like orientation to Christianity, right? And that also inherently produces a level of ignorance about religions that are not Christian by default, is to really think complexly about what religion does and what queer people can do with it. It can be more than simply rejection or life liberal devotion to a unfleshed out idea, right? But that really, as I would tell people when I would do things like teach Quran study or like host study circles, is that we bring our own ideas about what we want to do with religious texts, but the key is to own what we're doing with it, right? Like if you want to have an abolitionist reading of, say, like the Quran, the Tanakh, which is what people in Jewish studies and Judaism call the Hebrew Bible, but nobody calls it that where I'm from. You have to be open about the fact that, like, I'm choosing to do this on purpose, right? Not because religion innately has to be abolitionist or innately has to be radical, but by owning and making that choice, we are saying that we're taking a step in a completely different direction, but also with the awareness of the tradition that we stand in. And so if I could offer anything to what it means to study religion on the range, I hope it can be a deep deeper understanding of what it means to engage religion above and beyond Christianity, which is not my area of expertise whatsoever. Or an understanding of Islam that, in my experience, when you're in spaces where religion, like non-Christian religions don't permeate, most people's context is like CNN or the internet, which is a double-edged sword on its own.
Thank you all for great presentations. We have a bit of time for questions. Do you have any questions that we have prepared? It looks like Hang has a question.
I know, that's why I'm scared. Haruki, you talk about division made by largely by the US on homeland. Can you expand more on that?
Yeah.
And talk more about it? I'm just very interested.
A little bit about historical context. Yeah. So when Korea was liberated by, Japan being attacked by atomic bomb, which was totally unnecessary. U.S. only dropped atomic bomb in Japan just to send off Soviet Union. Right? Koreans actually started organizing themselves to have finally, after 4 decades of colonization, finally have an independent nation. And the U.S. flew in. They looked at the map and found, oh, this is a good line to draw between North and South. Let's have this temporary demarcation. That's what U.S. decided. And Soviet Union didn't fully have the power to contest it either. So both came. And contrary to what might be dominant knowledge, U.S. completely controlled the South, right? So the Koreans were trying to organize a whole nation having a general election. But U.S. decided, oh, we're going to establish South Korea as a nation. We're going to bring this Korean American scholar or whatever discipline from Princeton, put it into the president position and make it a state and have an election only in the southern half. And people resisted everywhere, all across. And massacre happened. So many towns, so many people got eliminated, just destroyed, murdered. And on the northern side, Soviet Union was there, but they were not like telling Koreans what to do. Like Koreans knew how to organize themselves. So the way in which all these superpowers came into the Korean Peninsula is completely different. And the temporary demarcation, because it was not an international border, the North Korean army tried to liberate the southern half, and it's considered invasion. It's not legally invasion because it's not a border, but turned into a whole Korean War. We only have an armistice, so the war never ended. And for decades and decades, people have been trying to have peace treaty. Until this year in January, North Korea was trying to have peace treaty. This January, North Korea abandoned this vision of reunification completely, seeing that the Trump-Kim summit completely failed. There's nothing. Negotiation only works when both parties have something to gain, and U.S. have nothing to gain by leaving Korea. So we have to demand U.S. out of Korea. And now we have to think about reunification in a little bit more further distant future, because the war escalation, the hostility of the U.S. is skyrocketing, and war is very imminent right now. So that's what we have to focus on. Just a little bit of
Thank you for coming. Sorry. So I am trying to work through my thesis question currently, and I'm really kind of being geared into like spirituality, specifically within Chicano feminism. I don't know if I'm being bothered, but I think I don't come from like a spiritual background. Like I grew up minimally Catholic, like my family doesn't really practice it. But I'm very interested in like why people believe in like a higher power, like what's the purpose, and like how is that tied to your studies. So I guess if you could talk a little bit more about like your background and zaynab, or like how you came to study religious studies.
Yeah. degree in Jewish studies from Hampshire College. Originally, I started off as a major in historical anti-Semitism, and so I studied the Holocaust, and I quite literally studied the not just ideological production of the Holocaust, but also the socio-political organization of the Holocaust, right? Like, what does it take to not just build a genocide, but like build an empire that then benefits from that genocide, right? And so part of the way that we took classes in Hampshire, because they want you to purposefully be interdisciplinary, is that even within your own particular fields, you're taking history, language, sociology, religious studies, whatever, right? And so I took a lot of philosophy and religious studies classes to understand how the academic study of religion works. Because it's very different from, say, walking into Barnes and Noble and buying a book about religion that, for better or worse, is written for somebody with a reading level of a sixth grader, and it's 9 times out of 10 trying to convince you to believe something, as opposed to talking critically about what does it mean to deconstruct your own beliefs, right? And as I got more and more into studying Judaism, but more specifically like Jewish law, quite a number of people in that discipline who are heavy hitters are queer. Daniel Boyarin's Carnal Israel in the 1990s like cracked open a completely new way of reading the Talmud, where in the very beginning of his book, he not only establishes that he wants to think about the production of gender and sexuality and antiquity differently, but that he reads Judaism as a religion that is colonized by Roman Empire. And that implicitly informs the way that he understands rabbinic text, right? I think if you're trying to do religious studies at an undergraduate level, particularly at a secular university, it's going to be less of what do people believe and more like how does, say, like queer Catholic studies work as a discipline? What questions do the people within that field have about their own religion, right? Like, I'm not an expert in queer Catholic studies, but regardless, even if you didn't do queer Catholic studies, many of the people in religious studies are queer, and sometimes it's a need-to-know basis kind of thing, and other times people are very blunt and open about it, right? So it really depends on what period, like what scholarship from what period of time you're engaging. It might give you very different answers from each other, right? I hope that answers
I was
it.
gonna ask, how did you, I guess, get to see Boulder, and do you like plan to stay?
I got to see Boulder the way all of us ended up here, I guess. Like, it's just academic job markets are usually it demands that you uproot yourself from your community that where you're from and be wherever else there's a job. And so I ended up here. I was teaching in Eastern Massachusetts before that, and it was just a really small town, and I was a small university, and I wanted to get out there and ended up here without knowing anything about Colorado. So, and most of us have that. You also didn't know anything about Colorado, right?
I knew you were here.
Yeah. I think the university just demands that we just like leave and we uproot ourselves, which I have a lot to say about in terms of how university then expects that like we don't have communities and we are not grounded in our communities and we can just be intellectual thinkers and we can be based wherever and then do that intellectual work without the relationships that we all come through. So that's a whole different thing. Do I plan to stay in Colorado? I am not a US citizen, and I'm a Canadian citizen. I grew up in India, and I came to the US because Canada doesn't have that many universities, and there was easy to get a job here. And this would be my third election in the US. Every election, I can't think of another election. It's too much as an outsider, right? Like for those of you who are American. Like,
So does that mean you're gonna move or
ideally I
become a
want to.
citizen?
I know I don't want to.
Okay.
I count my blessings that I don't have to choose between a fascist and a genocider, right? Like so that it's easy for me to be righteous to say don't vote for either of them. But I understand for those who have that power to vote how binding that choice is, and like how people are pushed into that make those choices, right? And I feel very happy that I don't have to think about that. Like do I choose this person or this person, right? So, but I never want to be in that position. And as long as the US exists as an empire, I think people will always be forced into that position. Right? So I want to not be in that position. Will I leave? Depends on if I got a job somewhere. Yeah.
Thank you. I think maybe we'll wrap up there, and then students might come over and ask some questions if they have any one-on-one. But thank you.